So I've just got some reflections for you on having kind of lived through, this is really for an FNCI discussion on how you move forward and try to build consensus and broadly based support for the vision and scenario that you're working on. So let's just say it's a net zero Northern BC leadership vision, right? Rewilding within, a co-governance or a governance system. I mean, it sounds great. So let's say that that's your scenario. I really liked Chris's, my experience has been that, the idea of building the vision, getting people in on the vision, create the storyline, then go to numbers, and then go to your integration and your optimization, measurement, accountability, what are the results. So I was a couple of years ago, my background, for those of you who don't know me, and I don't think there's anybody left on the phone now, and I think I know most of the people in the room, is I'm a corporate sustainability type from Vancouver, long time. I worked in the forest industry when Alex and our hair was different color, and worked on a lot on the Great Bear Rainforest, Clayoquot Sound, the whole transition to sustainable forestry. Have been very involved with ecosystems and offset markets and nature-based solutions through my work with WWF and Forest Trends and the ecosystem marketplace over the years. And then I worked on the corporate sustainability side of the Vancouver Olympics. And I just spent 6 years in Alberta as Chief Sustainability Officer for Enbridge. So really deeply involved in energy transition and oil and gas and renewables and how that's all moving. And while I was in that role, I had the opportunity to be on the Leach panel for Alberta's climate policy and climate report there, or the advice from that panel. And I also more recently was with Marin Smith, and we co-chaired the Generation Energy Council report, which you heard the person from NRCan on the phone earlier this week talk about. Appears, and it was a report that was done now 2 years ago, so it's a bit dated. But anyhow, it's in the minister's mandate letter. We made a whole bunch of recommendations on how to move forward. So 2 years ago, I was in a room like this with multi-stakeholders who were on the Generation Energy Council, and we had people from industry and the environmental group and First Nations leaders and people from the prairies and the Maritimes and the coast and the north and the south. And we were all in a room, and Chris actually gave us a couple of presentations. We went through a lot of the presentations that you guys have been going through. And then we were asked to come up with the first part of what he described there on that transition. What would be a unifying vision for Canada around Canada's energy future and the transition to it by 2040? So this little slideshow, and so we've got a report, we do have some numbers. We did sort of try to move into that second tier that Chris was talking about in terms of setting up for measurement and integration. But after our report got done, and it was about I'll talk about the process in this slideshow. Then I sat down with Marin, and we tried to do the really, really simple version of it that not so much talks about what was in the report, because it's very similar to the pathways that you've been looking at today in terms of what does the energy transition look like, but it's more sort of customized to that Canadian perspective. But we tried to look at how do you set the table for a dialogue that can be inclusive around this, so you don't tip into the polarization that can surround often public discussion. We saw it in the federal election, and you see it in the US over the Green New Deal and everything that's going on there. So how do you set the table so you can have an inclusive dialogue that respects everybody's different point of view, because you're not going to get consensus on this, but still enables you to move forward on developing that vision, figuring out how to measure it, what matters, and then starting to implement it. So this was just a little, and you guys are already way ahead of us because you have Alina doing your graphics. So Marin and I, what we thought we'd try to do is
Unknown participant is now exiting.
What we thought we'd do is we'll just do it with cartoons. So we just tried to do it graphically. There are no numbers in this presentation, and like I say, it's just really focusing on how we tried to set the table for that inclusive dialogue. So pathways, yes, it's about pathways to a net zero future. But I got to tell you, when we were doing the Gen N report, net zero it hadn't been adopted by the federal government. So we're predating, shows you how quickly some of this stuff moves, because this was only 18 months ago, and now net zero has come on, and we referenced it relative to the Paris Agreement. But anyhow, so net zero is not in this. But our search was for a unifying narrative on Canada's energy future, and we were really looking at 2040. And during our process, and remember, diverse groups, diverse perspectives at our table, the federal government bought the TMX pipeline, right? And so here we were trying to figure out, what is this? And I was obviously relying on a lot of my experience in the stakeholder engagement around the Alberta climate plan too, right, in 2015. But in the middle of our process, the federal government bought the TMX pipeline. And that became really, really contentious at our table, right? That just reopened all of the opportunities for polarization. So anyhow, we were trying to get a narrative that embraces the transition to clean energy, the transition to we didn't call it net zero future, but anyhow, clean, reliable, and affordable energy was kind of where we could get our table to all agree to meeting the provincial, territorial, federal, and global climate goals. And then we wanted to grow Canada's position in global energy markets and technologies, right? That could be solutions. And then at the time we were doing this, as I was saying, because the TMX bought, we were really trying to struggle to come up with a narrative or a vision that would, was all yes to pipelines, no to carbon pricing, or yes to carbon pricing and no to pipelines. And so that was always a theme that we were struggling with at our table. So we were trying to move from that to, you can tell this is dated now, but we are the North. What is the right strategy for a northern country like Canada? Can we get there? So you can look at our report, Getting to Our Energy Future Together. It's online, it's available, and to some extent, some of those core ideas are aligned with all of these transition pathways. So something that NRCan and Environment Canada are still using, I think, as a reference. But the background to how we got to this table, the council table, was that in 2017, the federal government convened this generation energy dialogue about Canada's energy future a generation from now. And they actually had, they had different ways that people could participate in the dialogue, from regional meetings to online forums to research papers that were done by different institutions and universities. But in total, there were about 400,000 Canadians that participated in that dialogue, and there was a summary from that dialogue. And then that summary went to our table, our Gen N table, and they asked us to try and develop this consensus report, right? And so what we found from the dialogue, in terms of, we wanted to start with what Canadians could agree upon. So what they could, here, I'm not going to go through all these, but obviously what most Canadians can agree upon is that we have some competitive advantages in this area in terms of forests, in terms of energy, in terms of technology, in terms of people. And we have to accelerate investment in the areas where we have competitive advantage if we want to play in this space. And then then there needs to be a focus on local solutions. So what's our plan for domestic emissions? And equally importantly, there has to be a focus on global solutions. What are the products and technologies and resources and people skills we can export to the rest of the world? So things that you've been talking about here. So, but most of all, what came out of the dialogue with the 400,000 Canadians was that, most Canadians agree, we need a plan. We need that vision. We need that plan. We can be continually readjusting it, then that's fine, right? But we need that plan to reduce climate risk, create more access to clean energy. That plan's got to also include personal choices and behavior, and everybody has to be in on that plan to some extent, notwithstanding the fact that there'll always be some differences in perspectives, and that Indigenous rights, governments, decision-making, and ownership is also very key to that plan in the Canadian context. So most Canadians will actually agree on those points, right? Where we differ is maybe the pace and scale of change that's going to be involved in that plan, and what constitutes equitable distribution of risks, costs, and benefits in that plan. And that's where you'll see a lot of differences among Canadians, depending on where you live and how old you are and what your income is and all the rest of it. So we tried to, as a council, start by building on the things that we could agree upon, obviously, as a basic starting point. And we thought if we could, build on our points of convergence, that would enable us to navigate our differences. So that was kind of the wisdom that informed where we start. And, we were arguing through the night on email, over weekends, in meetings in person. And as I say, the purchase of TMX came in the middle of that. And one time we were at this meeting, and one of the members of the council, one of the fellows who's really a lead in Canada on energy efficiency, said, he came up with a metaphor that brought us together, right? And helped us find that point of convergence. And he says, it's kind of like Canada is riding two horses. And it's funny because Chris and Rob were just talking about this, right? So we have to accelerate our domestic shift to clean energy, which is no carbon energy, right? And that's really through renewable energy and energy efficiency and pivoting to clean and less intensive energy for all our systems, buildings, transportation, the whole work. And then, so that includes a big component on energy efficiency, right? So Clean Energy Canada came out with a report during this work that up to 40% of our national emissions reduction target can be met through energy efficiency alone, right? But it also involves more clean power, decentralized generation, smart grids, electric vehicles, AI, systems for storage, and everything that you've been talking about here. And it also includes new export opportunities for our renewable energy, as well as our renewable energy, or particularly our renewable energy technologies, right? But then at the same time, on our second horse here, we have to accelerate the industrial shift to cleaner energy. So that's maybe we can get there through organic chemistry to no carbon, but it's certainly within the next 10 years critical that it move to low and lower carbon. So that's reducing carbon and costs, decoupling emissions growth from industrial productivity, using more renewable power and fuels, all the examples that you've been looking at here in terms of low carbon minerals and other industrial processes, and then applying new emissions reducing technologies. So we were actually even getting into our organic chemistry here, looking at what that movement might look like, right? And then optimizing efficiency through diversification, value add, closed loop, and those things. But then after, so we could agree. Once we got the two horses, we were able to, everybody around that table could see themselves in one of these pathways related to one of these horses. And then of course we thought, well, really the power here is when you put those two horses together, right? And you've got shared infrastructure for power, heat, and transportation. You have an international emissions trading. And now suddenly you're not just improving things incrementally, you have the opportunity to improve them exponentially. And for our export dependent sectors and businesses, you have the opportunity to capture global advantage from that. So at the end of the day, we did come up with a narrative. The two horses helped us get there. Really the narrative was aimed at broadening the solution space, aligning ambition. It was based on multiple pathways. I have to tell you that at our table, most of the people from the green side thought that those of us on the industrial side were, not realistic about how much emissions could be reduced by carbon capture and storage in the short term and all the rest of us. And those of us that were more from the industrial business side were skeptical that we could really hit the EV targets that the people on the other side of the table were saying that we needed to be able to hit. But we found that this framework enabled us to work together to get that vision and then move to the next level around numbers and efficiency. So the idea of multiple pathways, renewable energy, efficiency, industrial reduction, resilient, affordable energy systems. These are the things that bring Canadians together. And that was our experience. And that it really helps, and it's really important to get that narrative right at the beginning of the process, like the one that you're on right now, or the journey, because it's what can tide you through the hard times, because inevitably those polarizing issues are going to come up.